So we are trying to define things in this chapter, and we try to define development, sustainable development, risk, and now we will look at values and what is expressed as valuable. So you are always trying to preserve things or get to a state which is valuable. So we call it preferred scenario. Values may be seen as desirable trans-situational goals varying in importance that serve as guiding principles in the life of a person or other social entity. In other words, values are what people care about. So simply remember that. To grasp what human beings value in relation to managing risk for sustainable development, it's important to understand how values come to be ascribed to whatever is declared to have value. These are important because if you push the idea of sustainable development and you haven't defined all these things, then people may start questioning what are you even trying to achieve or what are you trying to force them to go through. So these are essentially interventions: adaptation, mitigation, sustainable development, risk management. These are interventions into people's lives and livelihoods, so you need to carry them along. So the more well defined the things are, the easier to get them on board, right? No man is an island, entire or itself. This time-worn quote by the 17th century English poet indicates that human beings are social beings functioning together in society. Giddens takes this idea further by stating that how human beings experience their social context influence how they perceive and understand it, and therefore also how they will act in that social context. These actions in turn produce and reproduce social cultures which guide and restrict the actions that human beings may take. Human actions are thus fundamentally linked to social structures which are representations of established patterns of behavior and have the purpose of keeping order while coordinating stable activities. As I said before, in the Eleanor Ostrom framework, these are action arenas with repeated interactions in various action situations, which are full of rules, regulations, norms, punishments, and expected behaviors, and so on. What human beings value is, in other words, socially constructed in context where prolonged human action creates social structures that direct human beings in what value to ascribe to objects. It is, however, rare that society is totally homogeneous, granting room for individual variation, as there may be several social structures competing for dominance. This indicates that the more heterogeneous the society, the more individual variation is possible in what human beings value. Values may thus be seen as acquired both through socialization to dominant group values and through unique learning experience of individuals. These matter because things like altruism are learned. There are specific cultural values on whether you protect the poor and vulnerable, the women, the young and the old. You provide welfare network for them, safety nets, and so on and so forth. In order to understand what people express in particular contexts, it's important to consider that we can know more than we can tell. What people know can be divided into explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge, so that we'll look at in a figure. Explicit knowledge consists of concepts, information, and insights that are possible to specify, store, and directly transmit to others. Tacit knowledge, on the other hand, is not directly transmittable and consists of knowledge that makes up our mental models for creating meaning to our experiences, as well as our know-how and skills to apply in specific contexts. They take various forms. They are often called cultural memes, or things that societies and cultures do that are not explicitly transmitted, but you learn by being in the culture for long enough. However, explicit and tacit knowledge are closely connected, as explicit knowledge must rely on being tacitly understood and applied, and again depends on the context and so on. So this is just more discussion along these lines. So let's maybe I won't read all of it. So here is how it works, the relationship between key cognitive concepts of knowledge. So knowledge can be explicit or tacit, and tacit can be focal awareness or subsidiary awareness, and subsidiary awareness connects to focal awareness through schemata and scripts. So if you don't understand such details of the theoretical concepts of knowledge, then don't worry, we'll quickly move to sustainability and sustainable development itself using these as backgrounds. They'll become clearer contextually. So to summarize, what individuals express as valuable in any situation is socially constructed in context and is determined by their values and by what they have in their focal awareness at that time. This takes into account the functions of their current schemata and scripts, and it indicates that human beings construct their own mental models of reality through active selection and interpretation of information around them. So you can think of it as the rolling hills that real estate guy and a farmer and a hunter was looking at. It may then be argued that it's of no use to discuss what's valuable and important to protect, as each account is destined to be subjective and fragmented. However, this is not at all the case. Explicit dialogue may facilitate the integration of individual mental models, and each of which giving a limited perspective on the world, but they can be integrated into one shared model, which is vital for creating a common understanding of the challenge at hand, which is sustainable development. It is true that each individual account is unlikely to give a complete picture of what is considered valuable on their own, but it's likely that what is mentioned in a dialogue between several individuals triggers additional scripts and amends schemata, thus activating additional knowledge by moving it from their subsidiary awareness to their focal awareness. So again, lots of words, so maybe we can skip it. For instance, the Ministry of Agriculture focusing on securing state revenues by promoting the production of cash crops, while Red Cross Society might focus on reducing the risk of famine by advocating for increased diversity of food crops. So again, valuable for the Agricultural Ministry may be something very different than what is valuable for the Red Cross, and so on. So let's read this as well. Hazards that trigger destructive events. The more common, so we are just still in definitions, the more common contemporary approach to manage risk skips the explicit analysis of what is valuable and important to protect and starts instead with identifying and selecting a set of hazards. So risks come from hazards. As we said in the IPCC context, it's hazard, exposure, vulnerability, and so on. Establishing what can trigger destructive events that impact what human beings value is important, but generally subjective, as it is determined by human beings' values and perceptions of risk. Various demographical factors have been identified as influencing risk perception. So let's, but not all such differences lead to differences in how hazards are ranked internally. So we're still talking about mental models. So key aspects of hazard analysis then: location. Where is the source of the hazard event located? Is it close to us? Is it far away from us? Is it going to affect something we consider valuable? Spatial extent. What geographical area is directly affected by the hazard event? Speed of onset. How fast is the hazard event evolving? Duration. For how long a time is the hazard event taking place? Earthquake happens quickly, destruction happens quickly, recovery takes a long time, flood also is a rapid event, droughts may persist, and so on and so forth. Frequency or likelihood. How often is the hazard event happening? So in the climate context, we mentioned how events of a 100-year return period begin to happen more often, and so on. Magnitude or intensity. What is the destructive force of the hazard event? So we talk about the scale of the cyclones and hurricanes hurricanes, the Saffir-Simpson scale going from category, tropical storm to category 1 to 5, and now there is arguments being made that the wind speeds are so strong that maybe we need to increase the scale and define category 6 and 7 hurricanes and so on. This crucial step of identifying and selecting a set of hazards is sometimes referred to as hazard analysis, and is aimed at establishing necessary spatial and temporal magnitudinal aspects of each hazard included when managing risk of sustainable development. This copula is a very important paper that is used in a lot of the hazard analysis and becomes very critical. So POX 5.1 is this one that we just read through. A clear definition of the location and spatial extent of each hazard, its speed of onset and duration, its frequency or likelihood, as well as its magnitude or intensity are requisites for this part of the analysis. The more specifically each hazard event is defined, the easier it is to construct risk scenarios. That said, it's impossible to include all possible events in a risk analysis, which calls for categorizing such initiating events and allowing one hazard event to represent a number of them. This is referred to as partitioning the risk scenario space. That's a kind of a detail, but now we have compound risks, multiple compound events, as I mentioned before, earthquake followed by floods or mudslides and damage to crops, or pollution of water sources and health outbreaks and so on and so forth can create risks that are very complicated in a very complex system. Okay, so we'll leave this and come back and look at vulnerability. So even though this book is doing things separately, hazard, risk and vulnerability and so on, it's still along the lines of the IPCC concept that I keep mentioning, risk being a multiplier of hazard, vulnerability, exposure, and also depending on the response, because a well-designed disaster management and disaster response obviously reduces the risk of impacts, alleviates the impacts, and speeds up the recovery as well. Okay, so we'll come back and discuss that part.